Hi, welcome to another episode of Scorpio Season. Here today with your hosts, Lisa and Venkat. How's it going, Venkat?
Hey, Lisa, I got my second vaccine, so I'm pleased.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
what are we talking about today, Venkat? We're talking about vaccines?
we are talking about the letter X and the unknown. And I guess the vaccine is kind of an unknown. It's like a totally new, unknown, untested vaccine that we are all kind of like diving into. Well, it's no longer unknown. Millions have taken it, but still kind of interesting.
Yeah, so speaking of unknowns, like how much fear did you have facing this unknown of getting your second vaccine? Like, I mean, what would you, first of all, I think is like how much would you classify it as an unknown thing that you were doing? Um,
Well, for me personally, I think it was more of an unknown than for random people because if you're sort of reasonably educated and take an interest in scientific things, you've probably heard the news that mRNA vaccines are a whole new technology. They're not like old vaccines. But if you actually don't keep up with the news or are not like educated enough to know that there's actually a difference, then if you're scared, it's probably like undifferentiatable from being scared of like existing vaccines, right? It's part of a generic vaccine fear. So I think when we actually first talked about vaccines and I said something like, I was going to wait a little. This was like months ago when the first Pfizer vaccine was approved or something. But yeah, I mean, it was it was an unknown, but kind of a neutral unknown, as in like I was willing to dive in. I didn't have any particularly strong feelings about it. Some people do, but that's actually a good sort of theme. Like, what feelings does the unknown evoke in people, right? So, what about you? What are the different kinds of reactions you have to the unknown?
I mean, I think it depends. I think a lot of times I sort of like ignore the unknown, like I pretend it doesn't exist. Um, that sounds weird, but like when you're getting into a new subject, it's really helpful if you just pretend like there's not anything you can't like that you. That sounds weird. I'm not going to say this correctly. It's a little bit of like self monitored ignorance when you're getting into it where you're like, oh, so like when I was 19 and went to Brazil for the first time, I like didn't spend any time, energy, or effort thinking about what the unknown slash like flying to a foreign country would be like. I was, like I said, I like just sort of like ignorant about it, just didn't think about what it would be like. And then when I got there, I figured it out. It was, I don't know, it wasn't anything.
This sounds it's kind of like confidence. I would call that response confidence when you react to an unknown as I can figure it out. I don't have to prepare. I don't have to investigate because it's not scary or intimidating. I can just figure it out. So that's one possible response.
Yeah, I guess so. Though we were talking just before we started recording about
Mhm.
like when I came across like an unknown thing on Twitter that kind of definitely did freak me out in a way that I like have trouble kind of explaining what the freak out was. But have you heard
Mhm.
of Weird Sun Twitter?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, the handles that are X of Y format, right? Like,
Yeah,
uh,
there's like a whole format to the like
yeah.
the way that they name themselves, and there's definitely, I'm gonna call it an aesthetic of how they communicate with each other and the sort of posts that they do. But to an outsider discovering, it's like a mini community. An outsider kind of just happening across it, it like really felt like going down like a rabbit hole, like literally felt like going down a rabbit hole because I was like, well, they all seem to be saying really interesting, smart things, but I can't figure out what like the central tendency that ties them all together is. Like I couldn't figure out what the central like it wasn't all one person, it was a bunch of different people. I was like, okay, but what's organizing this? Um
Uh, and I think
like
to the adding to the strangeness, when I first encountered it, I think I noticed the visuals a lot. Like they all had like vaguely medieval Christian iconographic kind of visuals, right? And yeah, I think I had the same reaction as you. It was like mildly creepy, and but I see the pattern. It was like X of Y, like member of species is one, I think, or
yeah,
any such
so they're
pattern,
definitely
right?
like groupable. You can put them all into the same like, oh, this is all the same like category of thing
Yeah.
pretty easily.
And I forget where. I think I looked it up once, like where it came from. I think it came from somewhere in the post-rat, somewhere near rationalist blogosphere.
Yeah, like, I
Uh,
would say it's kind of like a precursor, post-rap precursor, so to speak. Like, I think
yeah,
a lot of the people that spent time in Weird Sun Twitter and maybe still spend time, I actually saw someone retweet a Weird Sun thing the other day, and, like, also had the similar like reaction, like, oh my god, it's back. But like, okay, so when we were talking earlier about this, I mentioned how like within a week, not even a week of finding Weird Sun Twitter, I then encountered Weird Sun Twitter in real life. And that was like the weirdest, like it really felt like running into the Illuminati. Like you discover the existence of the Illuminati and then you like go to a coffee shop just for like a normal hangout with someone. And then the person I was meeting up with also started talking to someone else in line. Um, and that other person about Weird Sun Twitter, and I was like, wait a second, what's going on? I'm getting coffee with the Illuminati. I didn't even know this was like I didn't know like what I was doing when I asked to get coffee with this person, and now I have joined. Like now I am like 1 degree of separation from the weird stuff I just found on the internet. That is like, yeah, that was a level of like I don't. That was like a little bit. I'm not gonna say outside of my comfort zone, but that's definitely approximating the boundaries of my comfort zone. I think kind
So
of an
this is
interesting thing
kind
to.
of interesting. Like I think any Weird Sun Twitter people listening to this are probably going to be very flattered by what you just said, because I think that's the effect groups like this kind of go for. Like my assumption is that it didn't start off in any coordinated way. Like somebody came up with a format and like a particular visual, other people thought it was cool and copied it, and then the copying format became the handle plus the medieval iconography, right? And I think that's how these things spread. And I think people sort of this is kind of a very Gen Z way of thinking of it. It's like people vibe off of it, and you either have like a positive or negative vibe. If you have a positive vibe and you're not too intimidated, you kind of join it. If you have like a slightly uncanny or like I don't know, weirded out vibe, then you might like watch it and notice that it's a thing. Like I'm trying to think of like other examples of the unknown, encountering the unknown on
I mean, it's
Twitter.
kind of like finding a meme cult, like a real, like it's a meme that becomes a cult, right? And then like I don't know, and then you can interact with it as cult or whatever. Maybe cult's a little strong, but like I think I think the term cult kind of does like it has a lot of all negative connotations with it, but I kind of think of it as a precursor to the word culture, right? So like you cults are a predecessor to culture. Like you have to have the cult before you get the culture. That sounds weird. I don't know.
No, I think that's totally right. And sometimes it's like a chicken and egg process that repeats. Like an example that I think both of us probably were less sort of freaked out by would be the laser eyes for the crypto community, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
when they started doing that, for some whatever reason, that didn't creep me out at all, like
Mhm.
visually, like before I even knew what it was. And then I was like, oh, okay, it's people trying to get Bitcoin to 100,000, and that's like a thing. And it's like, it didn't creep me out. And once I learned of it, it's like, all right, I guess I'm rooting for that as well. So, yeah, but I'm not going to like put laser eyes in my eyes. But it's like, it's kind of funny. There, it was more a reaction of, huh, what is this? Because I think it didn't have like the aesthetic of inducing uh, I don't know what to call it. Like there's a particular, there's strange, and then there's like this. I have a word cloud of like qualifiers around strange, like uncanny, weird,
I would call it almost like
scary,
bewilderment. I was bewildered.
bewildered. Yeah, I was like, huh. Yeah, it's not scary. So there's like, what are some other
Oh, but it
emotions you
makes
can
your
have in
brain
response to the
hurt.
unknown?
What other responses to the unknown?
Emotional, specifically.
Emotional. I was like, there's fear, afraid of things you don't understand. Um, some
I
people
think
get
there's contempt. There's the opposite of that, right? Contempt, as in it's strange, it's new, you don't understand it, and you can see a pattern, but it seems faintly ridiculous, and you're like, that's not important. And then it can become important, right?
I mean, we could almost say I think like COVID's a really good example of that, I think, in terms of like reaction style. I think like the contempt reaction to COVID was like definitely something that we saw in maybe media, and like the contempt was more at like I feel like the contempt was like contempt is contempt always political? Like maybe that's like a bit of a stretch, but the I feel like a lot of the contempt was aimed in like a semi-political way in that like it's used as a like at least in the media as a way to discredit a source of information.
Yeah, yeah, total. Like if you remember, initially something interesting happened. Like the it was a lot of tech people in Silicon Valley who were like the first early warning responders and started sort of taking it seriously. And then immediately the anti-tech press sort of went off against it, and I think Vox and others, and they were like, "Oh, the tech people are trying to be unnecessarily panicky." And then, of course, the left media got onto it, but then the right media started getting contemptuous of it. So I think you're onto something there. It's like until a threat or an unknown is understood on its own terms, you see it through the lens of how other people respond to it, and other people's responses become more of a thing to react to than the thing itself. Like people were not responding to COVID, but responding to other people responding to COVID, like China, the World Health Organization, the CDC, uh, your political opponents, things like that. So,
Well, have
hmm,
you seen, I feel like someone tweeted recently like a thing about like posting photos of like typed, like printed out pieces of paper posted on doors has been a thing lately.
yeah,
And one that came across lately wasn't about, a lot of them have been job related, but this one was like, it looked like it was on a front door of a home. And it said, if you've been vaccinated, you're not allowed in because you might be giving off genetic material from the
yep,
vaccine that would be dangerous. And the thing about that that's kind of ironic is like, well, COVID is genetic material that someone is giving off when they get close in your space, right? Like in an
yeah,
enclosed
yeah.
space, COVID's transmitted basically through the air, the aerosols, you breathe it out, it's in the air, you breathe it in. So like it's genetic material that you're passing around via the air. Um, and so that's the reason you go to get the vaccine, is so that you don't give off gas COVID. So you're no longer off gassing COVID. Uh, but it's
You're
like
outgassing the evil vaccine from Bill Gates that's going to put 5G receivers into your blood.
yeah, but like I mean, but like so that just seems so reactionary, right? Like they're like doing the same reaction, but it's towards a different like impetus, which is the people who got vaccines, where it's like the
Yeah,
people
yeah.
who were anti-COVID were doing the exact same thing, except for anyone who wasn't wearing a mask for reasons. So it's
So I think one of the ways to interpret that is laziness as a response to the unknown. Like actually engaging the unknown and thinking about what it means and like investigating it takes a lot of work. It's much easier to react to something you're already familiar with and say, all right, if I like it, I'm going to go with that reaction. If I dislike that person, I'm going to go against that reaction. And I don't have to do any thinking myself, right? So
that is an incredible point I had not considered. Yes, that is a
yeah,
great, yeah. And that's what's,
and
go ahead, yeah.
yeah, I was just thinking of an example today. Like somebody tweeted at me a screenshot from Senator Josh Hawley's new book. I think it's called "How Tech is Evil" or something like that. It's basically an anti-tech creed, and
Hmm.
he quotes me in it. And that my like this time I immediately just laughed. But in the past, whenever people I violently disagreed with politically quoted me, it has happened a few times. I would immediately have this sort of like extremely uneasy reaction of like what's happening to my words, they're being taken and used for evil purposes by evil people. Now I'm like, I think I've grown a thick skin or something. But that's, I don't know, it seems related somehow because in a way the adversary is kind of an unknown, and when you see something familiar in the heart of the unknown, like your own words in sort of the writing of like somebody you feel is like other, that's kind of an example of like uncanny uh, strangeness. Yeah.
I do have to say, I saw this quote. I like the quote they used. So I like,
Yeah, it didn't seem like a misrepresentation of what I said or an out of context
yeah, I felt it was a
rephrase.
great, I thought they did a great point of using, I really liked it because I was like, that's a great point.
Yeah,
I
I
like,
mean, I use it in a certain way. I don't use it to conclude that big tech is evil, blah blah blah. And apparently, going by the title of their book, that's how they end up using it. But it's not an out of context misrepresentation. It's more like it's a it's an observation about the world of technology, and you're free to like use it in your argument your way, and I'll use it my way, right? So it's a neutral piece of ammo. But anyway, that's a little bit of a side trail. But yeah, what else about the unknown?
I mean, the unknown is ammo. Is that like, I like, okay, when's the last time you've seen the unknown weaponized?
The unknown weaponized. Oh, I think the video I shared with you last night of a tiger in Houston,
Mm,
that's an interesting example. It's not the unknown per se because tigers are not exactly unknown, but in that context, obviously, it's a weird thing to see a tiger on the streets of Houston. And I was struck by the the guy pointing a gun at the tiger who was apparently a sheriff's deputy who lived in the neighborhood,
mhm.
and he was like, I guess trying to control the situation, and apparently comments said that the tiger was clearly a juvenile and not in a threatening, attacking posture. He was like almost trying to play or something. But he was saying his words were kind of funny. The deputy's words were something like, "No, sir, no, sir." That it would not occur to me to say that to a tiger I think might attack me. And then later, when the owner came out and it was getting resolved, he said something like, "Fuck you and fuck your tiger." It's like the unknown sort of throws us for a loop, as in we literally don't know what to say to it. Like, what do you say to a tiger in your street? Apparently, no, sir. That's what you say to it.
I mean, I can see the logic there, right? But you're right. It's a repatterning of existent logic. It's not like,
I mean, where would that even come from? It doesn't sound like something you would say to a misbehaving dog or cat, right?
I think it's something you would say to a misbehaving human.
Okay. So that's kind of interesting. Like when you see something unknown or at least unknown in context, you try to map it to something familiar. And a tiger is not harmless enough like a house pet that you can sort of talk to it in, childlike pet language. But on the other hand, it's not human, so you can't actually talk to it in language. So he kind of like gravitated on a middle path. It's like speaking the way you would to an adult, but in sort of like a animal tone. Huh. What other interesting unknowns have you come across recently?
Unknown, interesting unknowns. I mean, I have projects I'm trying to do which feel a little bit like fighting uphill against unknowns. I kind of just feel like I'm just kind of not throwing money at the problem, but a little bit of like, I mean, I could probably do some more reading. I feel like I'm trying to like avoid doing reading.
Is
Um,
this your chia mining problems that you wrote about in your newsletter recently?
yeah, I'm talking about mining stuff. That's exactly right. So I'm trying to build, so I bought a bunch of disks for doing chia mining. And I need to write up, one of my next planned posts for this week is to write up exactly what my rig looks like for chia mining. It's
For
completely,
those who are kind of new to mining and everything, can you like what's mining and what's chia mining in particular, and what do disks have to do with it? So what's the
yeah,
the quick one?
right. So I do crypto mining at home. I have a couple like ASICs which burn electricity, like that's their whole thing. And then Chia is a little different. It's based on proof of storage. So instead of like plugging a computer into the wall and just eating all your energy, you buy a bunch of disks and you fill their disks up with basically useless, well, sort of useless data files. And then how much disk space you're able to fill with these data files then becomes a ability to like participate in a mining network, and you get paid out coins as time goes on, in theory, depending on your ratio of
Oh,
how many disks of files you have in your local disk as to how many such files exist in all storage anywhere in the network in the world.
so wait, is this actually storage that's available in a decentralized way for people to use? Like, can I log on to Chia and like store some of my files there, like Dropbox?
No, it's not a useful storage thing. The files that I'm storage like don't correspond to anything. They're lookup tables for participating in block rewards. Like it's not. It's like it's so like no, it's not open. It's not like S3 on Amazon, which is like buckets that you put data into and then can pull back out at any time. That I think is the interplanetary file system, which is like the
Yeah.
Filecoin thing. So Filecoin is like based on storing people's files, and that's like been in the news lately because NFTs use it as a way to like permanently store file or semi-permanently store files. Chia coin, you would think, and I naively also thought this when I got into it a while ago, or started reading up on it, like over a year at this point. Um, but no, the files that you store are like useless data. You're basically turning disk drives into junk, filling them with junk. Um,
And this is so proof of storage. Is there like a good like what's the thesis behind it, that it's easier to waste storage than CPU cycle, something
Electricity.
like that?
Well, it's Chia. It's called Chia because it's a greener alternative to proof of work systems.
Ah, okay, got it. That's not a bad thesis actually, but it does feel like storage is something that could be turned into more useful things
Oh,
compared to like hash computation.
probably. I would not disagree with you. But if you have to waste something, storage disks or electricity that comes out of the wall, pick your poison, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
every cryptocurrency, you have to like have some sort of physical medium you're consuming to secure the blocks, because that's what makes it such that you can't just create a million indefinitely, is because there's some physical resource that got consumed in its consumption. um, Chia has chosen physical disks. Bitcoin
Huh.
has chosen electricity. um, yeah.
That reminds me of something else I just saw. I saw this news of new research that shows that clocks obey the second law of thermodynamics, and specifically, the more precise you want a clock to be, the more entropy it'll create. So yeah, I don't know, for some reason, this idea that to
What
create
is
proof of anything is you have to waste something. It sort of might be a general physics law. Like you want a more precise clock, you have to waste energy and like create entropy.
what is entropy?
Disorder, what you're creating on your disks, I guess. Yeah.
So could you say that to some extent, like, oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at is like one of the criticisms of things like Bitcoin is like beyond the specifics of it burns electricity and is like bad for the climate and stuff. It's I think like even if you took all the Bitcoin mining in the world and made it like based on renewable energy, based on solar and wind, people would still find it like distasteful because it goes against their Puritan ethic of you shouldn't just do wasteful things like run a computer computation that does nothing but produce like garbled strings which you call hashes, or run disks that do nothing but store noise as files. So I think there's a basic human tendency to feel that it's profane to just have like things running producing nothing of utility and wasting stuff. And that I think is a reaction to like, I don't know, entropy in the universe. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Even the absolute simplest function you can imagine, if you try to do like, I think of time, the reason I'm very interested in time and like think about it and write about it is it's like probably the simplest thing humans do is keep time, like tick tock, tick tock. It's like, it feels like even though it can get technologically complex, it doesn't produce anything. Like a ticking clock helps you do other things, but it's not fundamentally a productive part in itself. And it's like, all right, if you want to do it better and better, you have to create more and more entropy. So if something as simple as clock technology is that way, everything has to be that way is kind of my point.
It's interesting. I think you can make an interesting point about like the existence, like the nature of being human and timekeeping. um like the consciousness is a way of keeping time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Wait,
a
okay. So I just want to go back to this thing about the entropy and the clock. So when you say like you track, so tracking time would be like having a small crystal that oscillates, right? And recording every oscillation, right? So timekeeping is also some format of record keeping, right? So like when you make that oscillation, that it creates a record of what happened and when.
I mean, there's no such thing as absolute time, right? You reference processes with relative to each other. Like think of let's not talk crystals of quartz because that's an advanced kind of clock, but a very simple kind of clock like the pendulum clock you see in the background there, the wooden thing. And if
Yeah.
you think about the history of the pendulum clock, some like Galileo noticed that it had like a roughly stable oscillation, right? If you don't like move the pendulum too far out, it's pretty stable. But then the period of the clock changes with the weather, the length goes short or long. So it's like it's not totally stable, and they spent a lot of ingenuity and time and effort and adding complexity to make pendulum clocks more and more predictable. Like they made it with like multiple metals so that contraction of one would compensate for the extension of the other, and then you would have like a uniform length pendulum that would tell the time the same way in summer and winter. So I think the way to think about this is you reference processes in relation to each other. Like you have your own innate sense of bodily time, like sleep and wake cycles. You relate that to the rising and setting of the sun. And you notice that some things vary with respect to each other, and you want things that are as stable as possible. But yeah, that's what clocks are. They're like extremely stable processes. And to keep them more stable, you have to spend more energy and create more entropy.
Okay, it's a stable process. So it's a stable, repeatable like process that happens like repeatedly with the exact same duration, right? Um,
That's the assumption. Like I'm very physicalist about this. Time is not kind of like an abstract thing. It is specifically what the clock is telling you, because that's the only way you can define it. Like there's a
right,
reason when
okay.
Einstein,
But
yeah.
but I want to come back to this record keeping thing
Mhm.
because a clock is actually a record keeper,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally. It's a log.
Right. Okay. So what exactly is the entropy? Is the entropy the record? Like the so
I
having
haven't
like
looked into the research, but it's the production. Yeah, it's the production of the clock signal.
right,
That's
okay, but that makes sense to me that like as a computer programmer who like and you we've talked in the past about your fascination with the logging process, which makes sense that you're so interested in time because time is a log, like
yeah,
the
yeah.
timekeepers are logging processes, right? Um
I
the
should shill my book here. The book I'm writing called The Clockless Clock. One of the chapters is specifically about what I call the log level. And this is exactly my point. Like a ticking clock is like a cyclic, a periodic process. But if you sort of roll it out in time, it's basically an elemental empty log. Like tick tock, tick tock, tick tock.
yeah,
That's basically an empty notebook with rows. And you can choose to add other data to it. And then you can say either the tick tock is indexing the information you're putting in the log, or you can put it the other way around. Like here's a thought experiment I like, which is you say you can tell that the period of a pendulum sort of changes with the temperature, right? But you can also argue that the temperature is a stable quantity and that the period, you can sort of, how do I put it? If you, let's see, you could measure the temperature of in wherever you are at noon every day and relate that to the period of the clock. And you could sort of read time the other way, or you could use time to read temperature and temperature to read time. Like instead of plotting temperature as a function of time, like think of how you would do that. You can just plot cumulative temperature as the x-axis. Like today it's say 50 degrees, tomorrow is 55 degrees. So the cumulative would be 50, 105, and so forth. And then you would plot the pendulum duration that way, right? So my point there is there's nothing fundamental about time as the x-axis of a log or a record-keeping thing. This is why blockchains are kind of interesting, because the block identifier itself becomes the time signal. Like,
it
do you
is.
remember the time Vitalik was? There's rumors that Vitalik had been kidnapped, and he held up. Oh, this is really fun. You should look it up. So this was several years ago. There was a rumor that Vitalik had been kidnapped, and that was, of course, about to crash the Ethereum market. But the way he produced proof of life was he held up a piece of paper with the latest block identifier written on it. And this is, you can see where it comes from. Like in old-fashioned movies, to show proof of life for a kidnappee, you would hold up a newspaper, and Vitalik held up a block number, right? So that's a way of doing time. It's like you can say that at this time this block was mined, or you could just say that block number is in fact the time signal.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That's incredible. Like what's so incredible about that is I feel like we've entered like I feel like you've just given us me proof that like we've technologically shifted such that like you'll be able to tell in movies. Like you could make a movie about Va- uh Vitalik holding up the thing and it would make sense to like a whatever cult we're a part of, the weird sun Twitter that is crypto. But it's like to me, I'm kind of like, well, it's like sort of like the hacker movie where they did stuff that was like very hacker in jokey. Anyways, it's just kind of a weird, like, oh, that's a weird.
I mean, this is
Anyways,
an unknown we are entering. We are entering an unknown where time no longer is necessarily tied to like some historical cultural event like the birth of Christ and how many years since that. We can now tie it arbitrarily to the evolution of a computational process. And we are now in Bitcoin block number, whatever block number is the current top of the block or blockchain, right? So that's time right now.
600, 610s, the 610s, I
Of
think,
course, you would know it off the top of your head.
around there approximately. Well, only because I was looking it up for an article I wrote last week. I wanted to know how far we were, but yeah, I think it's 610s. I might have that wrong. I like there was a member of the Bitcoin community. I think it's the same guy who makes something called Cold Cards, which is like a he had this thing called the block clock, and it made the we're like so far off top. We're on clocks now, whatever. Oh, it was kind of unknown. Oh, wow. So we can tie I can tie this into unknowns. Okay, keep going. Okay, so a while ago, Jack Dorsey did an interview and there was a clock in the background of his photo, and people on Twitter were freaking out because they didn't know what the clock in Dorsey's background was, and it turned out it was a Bitcoin block that has a setting that shows how many satoshis a dollar is worth. A satoshi is like a fraction of a Bitcoin. There's like 8 decimal places after the dot to get satoshis. It's like that's satoshi. Um but anyways, I really wish I had gotten one of these block clocks. I should go back. They were like kind of expensive at the time he was putting them out, but now it's like
You know what I would like? A literal block clock, just showing the latest block number.
yeah, that's what it does.
I thought you said it's the value of a dollar in satoshis.
It shows different things, but it's mainly meant to show you the current block number.
Oh, okay. Maybe I would like to buy that. Like it would, instead of a world clock that shows you different time zones, it can show you the most recent block mined in the major blockchains, right?
Yeah.
That would be interesting. We live in a
Actually,
world.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, different chains have different block, like you know, like there's seconds and minutes, and like seconds move faster than minutes. Like different chains have different block frequencies. So like Dogecoin, I think comes every 2 minutes. Bitcoin's every 10 minutes. I don't know how fast Ethereum blocks get made. I guess probably somewhere in the 2 to 10 minute, maybe every minute. So you can have.
We should talk about this backwards. We should now say a clock is like 1/10 of a block. A minute is 1/10 of a block instead of a block is 10 minutes. We should talk that way.
Yeah, exactly. But you can have a clock that's like Ethereum block counter as like the minute hand, and like the hour hand is well, I guess like the 10-minute hand then would be the Bitcoin block counter. And so you could have like a little thing in the middle that's like the Ethereum block counter going around, and then a bigger one that's like the anyways.
But correct me if I'm wrong, the 10-minute is the sort of stochastic average, right? It can take slightly more or less. So it would be interesting if you were to standardize that as that's 1 unit of time. And it can, in clock time, it might be, 9 minutes, 30 seconds, or 10 minutes, 10 seconds, or whatever it is. But the average is going to be 10. But if you decide that whatever it is, that's the 1 unit, you could actually talk of time slowing down or speeding up, right? So it would create a very different way of being inside time.
Yeah.
But, it's I think we are about at time now, 3:15. So yeah, any last thoughts on the unknown?
No, there are no unknowable thoughts, I think, left to talk about.
All right, so 2 more episodes to go, Y and Z, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we have to think of topics for Y.
All right. I'll see you next week. Bye, Venkat.
Scorpio Season is proud to be sponsored by Smoke and Screws, the premium filter for your glass pipes, water pipes, and one-hitters. Check out their next generation screen technology at smokeandscrews.com. Great. And if you liked our show, don't forget to like and subscribe.